The bodies the authorities found in the middle of the park, laid out in the dead of night, were torn to shreds. A killer or beast unseen had struck them in a flurry, striking whilst everyone slept. Their skins were pale, blood sucked away, their cloths were torn, their limbs were snapped. One by one, the members of the HOA fell, their greed and power picked off, one by one, and yet they still carried an air of pretension and superiority. My name is Quentin Loreno. I'm somewhat of a middleman in the criminal underworld. I mediate the crime families, I arrange diplomatic marriages, I keep things civil, but above all I host auctions. Art is a tastefully wonderful medium of laundering money and hosting both underworld and legal auctions is kind of my speciality, and I also recover and sell cursed artifacts. Today was a day off. On days off I usually plugged in one of our many gaming consoles onto one of the large screen televisions to play some games. But not today. No, today I was busy signing off an import of a large crate of Sanheim root, a rare herb grown only in Stetsky temples that causes one to hallucinate several possible futures. This was when Steven, great assistant as he was, approached me. "Quentin," he greeted, helping me carry the crate, "I've got a request to make." The words struck me as odd. Of my little team, Steven was the quietest of the bunch, and on off days he spent his time with his family, away from the city, and safe in suburbia. "It's an off day, Steven," I pointed out. "You can do anything. Shouldn't you be with your family?" He nodded at that. "Aye, sir, but I need your help with something." He sounded somber, and Steven was never one for emotion. "I'm fighting the HOA in my neighborhood. I could really use some help. I'm a bit too old to really connect with the kids." This was true. Steven was quite old, and he'd worked for my father for over a decade before my father died, and the family business of the artifact black market fell to me. I owed him a favor, probably many. "Sure, what are you fighting on?" He sighed solemnly as he put the crate down. "The homeowners association want to build a new swimming pool and gym to replace Oldman Park. That park, there were distant memories. In his eyes, is one of the last few green spaces we have left. It means a lot for me, and I don't want to live to see it destroyed." This greatly puzzled me. I hadn't ever envisioned Steven as an environmentalist. No, he always seemed neutral on politics whenever they'd come up. He always said he was too old to be making decisions for the young, and that was one of the things I truly respected about him. Steven's cause sounded good enough. "I'll help you. Should I call Aster and Matt?" "No," Steven declined. "This is something I want to keep between us." I finished logging the crate onto our database, and then we were off. Steven owned a small van which he drove to work every day. Although I had always offered to convert one of the larger storehouses into a living space, we passed through the city fairly quickly. It was a weekend, and generally the city was never too crowded. A quarter of an hour later, and we were in rolling hills with the occasional group of markets, all identical. That was something that had always tickled me somewhat. Outpost of stores all identical, anywhere in the world, cookie cutter style. Anywhere you went there was a McDonald's. The stores soon passed into a neighborhood, and very soon we passed Oldman Park, construction already surrounding the place. They, Steven informed, still have to vote on it before starting. The vote was today, and Steven really needed help turning the crowd. He told me that they were stuck on an even split, and hoped a young voice such as mine would help raise some of the other youngsters to his cause. Steven parked the van in front of a medium-sized building, just as cookie-cutter as the stores we'd seen earlier. This was Town Hall, so how exactly can I help? I inquired, not entirely sure. Should I say something? Pretend I'm an activist? If you'd like, Steven suggested, shrugging. I think having you by me will simply raise my confidence. I opted to mention whatever passerbys emerged to save Oldman Park. This went well until we entered the main meeting room, a large, sterile white place with 4 members of the HOA sitting quite proudly. "These are some of the ones against me," Steven informed. We sat across from them, and I observed the group. They laid back on their phones, knitting, ignorant of our entrance. They seemed awfully, as Steven would say, too old to be making decisions for the young. Steven, an old woman with obnoxious blonde dyed, frizzled hair, hissed, "The renovations to Oldman Park will benefit us all." An old man who held a rosary crowed in, "Think of our house prices. They'll go through the roof." The third one, a woman with a loudly barking chihuahua, spat, "It'll make our neighborhood so much nicer. Who really goes to that park?" Stephen attempted to mention the families. That did, but was silenced by the fourth member of the gang. A gym, pool, and a spa instead of a good-for-nothing park will open up so many more jobs. 2. But I cut in, adamant to help my friend. You do realize this isn't for everyone, right? You know, studies suggest it's important to have at least one green space. The blonde-dyed woman whom I'll name Karen snapped. Who cares for those radical lies? First thing it's protecting the green space, and the next thing it's our children. This elicited a look of puzzlement on both our faces. Who said anything about children? Stephen pointed out. Karen's face turned red. A flock of college-age kids entered next, and they shook Stephen's hands, greeting him. These were the ones on his side, but even as they entered, of the oddly older, more hostile community poured in. Sorry, Steve, a cap-wearing man apologized, shirt filled with pins. My friends at the university think voting won't change anything. They only want after bigger companies. It's alright, Jason, Stephen assured. We can win this. I believe in you guys. I added, that didn't help at all. I couldn't vote anyway. I was starting to wonder what I should do. Voting began promptly as head of the HOA. The chihuahua-toting lady announced her plans to bulldoze the park and transform it into an elegant public spa, gym, and pool. Stephen argued against her next, telling the history of the place. The founders of the place, long before it had sprouted into a suburb, were settlers who kept the park sacred, a place of meditation and study. The rosary-clutching man commented that they would build a church so that all could meditate and study. Jason claimed it just wouldn't feel the same. On and on they argued while I sat, a bit lost on what to do, silently supporting Stephen. And as Karen mockingly called them, the greenies. Alright, cool it, Chihuahua lady snapped, slamming her purse on the table. Let's vote. All in favor say aye. The noise that followed was louder than the AIs of her dog. That many was in favor of destroying the part. So many, in fact, that the voters against could barely fight back. Then it's decided. Karen monotone, a smile on her face. With a vote of 32 to 30, construction begins tomorrow. We're so blessed. House prices are going to soar. Stephen frowned and walked out the room. I and many others followed. We walked together back to the van in silence. We just kind of sat there for a while before Stephen turned the key and started the van. I asked where we were heading next, and he told me it was the park. Parking in front of the construction work, he turned to me and put a hand on my shoulder. Hey, it didn't go well, but I want you to know I'm really glad you came. He paused and unbuckled his seatbelt. Your father never really helped me fight off the HOA. I've been doing it for the past decade. I guess it's over now. Now, there was something more here, more than a simple park. Thanks. He walked out and I followed, wandering to the center of the small, yet open field. A great stone sat in the center, frozen in time. The sun began to set, and the small streams around it glittered in the evening sun. It's not about the park, really, he continued, sitting in front of the stone. He touched it, and it seemed to glow. This is where I learned my magic. Stephen had served my father many years as his magician. He enchanted artifacts, drew protection sigils, and helped with virtually anything he needed. And he'd shown double the amount of work to protect me. This, I touched the rock. I didn't feel the sense of power that Stephen clearly did. He whispered something in a language I could not fathom to the rock. That was when I saw them. There were small people living on the rock. No, now it wasn't a rock, but a bustling city lit by fey lights and attended to by hundreds, no, thousands of people. Fairies, I gasped, shocked. I thought they'd all gone extinct. They were joyous in the way they carried themselves, ignoring the two of us. They fluttered here and there, bringing small crops to markets, strutting around happily, mindlessly whistling a tune. It was gorgeous, and now I understood why Stephen was so adamant on saving the park. Indeed, he confirmed, this is one of the last fairies to live. I remembered the history lessons my father had Stephen teach me, lessons of the darker, more magical world, tales of industrialization, and the horrors it brought about the little folk, tiny bodies, invisible to all but the trusted, blackened by smog, cities disguised as boulders and trees, crushed by the force of factories, construction. Once upon a time these beings had power. This time was long over the dawn of steel, and iron slew them by the thousands, for they were resistant to all but the most refined of metals. And so we killed them, a silent, slow death, genocide upon a million silent voices. I spent my childhood in this park, Steven started, tears welling up in his eyes. I saw them when I was 6, and I brought them food at first, curious. It was hard to gain their trust, but eventually I did. In the distance, I could hear the shouts of a chihuahua. I grew with the city and their queen, now dead, taught me magic. Steven drew something in the air, a message of pure energy that drifted into the heart of the city. Your father never liked getting involved with fairy folk, but they gave me my everything, and I can't let them die. Can't they move? I suggested. They have nowhere else to go, Steven revealed, sighing. On all 4 sides are they surrounded with homes, cars, people. They would be destroyed, and the last truly green places on Earth are threatened every day. Fairies were once powerful. They will fight, Steven finished. They won't leave, but they will fight, and I have done all that I can. They've sent their familiars to attack those who would harm them, but nothing has changed. He paused, eyeing 2 approaching figures, Karen and the woman with the dog. What happens here will likely be their last stand. And the 2 HOA members approached, staring at us with eyes as evil and the stones of Cubashina. They shook their fists against us as demons in the evening sun. Are you talking to a rock, Steven? Karen hissed. Do you live here, old man? The dog-wielding woman snapped. At Oldman Park. He's gone senile, hasn't he? Karen mocked, and she sized me up. Whoever the hell you are. This is when the wind started. From a calm nothing came a whistling, and the skies began to clear, letting the full force of the sun beat down upon us. And then the wind began to swirl, and me and Steven stepped back behind the stone city, scared. You should be happy we're improving. And then the wind screamed. It screamed as stray leaves and dust picked up, and I swear it was creating a face. There was a face as real as the grass and sky in the wind, swirling. The cruel 2 snapped and snarled at us, ignorant of the mysticism. The dog's barks increased in tempo and sound, warning of the disaster that was to come. The figure in the wind manifested then, a swirling, humanoid mass of leaves. And then the 2 HOA members screamed. It reached out a leafy, cutting appendage and covered Karen with its leaves, slicing and sucking her into the mess. What remained as it passed through her was a dead body, skin paler in color, and blood pouring out of her body, being vacuumed into the storm. Me and Steven only watched as the creature, enchanted through fairy magic, chased the woman, absorbing her into its body, and only leaving behind limbs, skin, and bones. The dog barked and fled the scene. The creature did not make chase. It faced us then, considered our efforts, and vanished into the wind, leaves, and blades of grass settling gently. Should we hide the bodies? I asked. Leave them here, Steven decided. Perhaps they will treat this as a sign. I shook my head. It was unlikely. The vote was 32 to 30. I reminded, with these 2 gone, it's a tie. Call an emergency redo or something. The bodies should delay construction for what? A week or so. A moment's pause came then. You're right, Steven concluded. We can still make this work. I had an idea then. I can get Aster. Her gift may come in handy. Steven understood my plan then. Aster's gift allowed her to reach into the minds of the weak. I assumed all HOA members were just as weak and frail as they looked on the outside. If we were lucky, she, perhaps, could uncover memories of the park, nostalgia, or perhaps dark secrets we could use as blackmail material. As we drove back to the auction house Steven mused over the Fairies' war. Their constructs of nature and flesh were powerful things, but beyond the park their power was limited by bits of metal and iron within the neighborhood. At best, perhaps a spirit fox or a lower tier golem. At worst, maybe a light that induced slight paranoia. Things were not looking good for the Fairies. I floated the idea of relocating them to the auction house, but it simply wasn't green enough. No connection with nature, no direct bond to freedom. No, they would have to stay, and we would have to fight. I wondered why I was helping Steven and the Fairies. It didn't affect me in any way whether they die or survive. Besides my good conscience, perhaps. But something deep within me told me this was the right thing to do, to save the endlings of an already dead race. That was it. I posted a surprise closure on my website for the next day. I lied about a leak in the water, intending to gather my team to stop the HOA. Now, I began. Having gathered all 4 of us in my office, I'm sure you're wondering why we're closed today. Another day off. Matt guessed, optimistic. Steven spoke next, telling his tale about our journey to the park and the vote we saw. He told his childhood, of how he gained their trust and was taught the ancient, arcane arts from the very source of all things magical. He pleaded for us to save the Fae, and to Aster and Matt's credit, they listened and agreed. He want me to rough them up, Matt suggested, flexing his muscles. I may have no magic, but I've hunted monsters since the day I was young. Nothing like that. I declined. I can come, she affirmed. Anything to help a friend. I'll call an emergency meeting, Steven decided, now realizing there was a chance. I can say that the deaths of Barbara and Karen, so her name really was Karen, puts the community out of balance. Then let's do this. I cheered, already stepping out the door. We took Steven's van. Also, he was the only one who drove to work. I lived inside the building sometimes, and Aster and Matt both had apartments. City turned to cookie cutter stores, and those stores turned to the suburbs, and before we knew it, we were there. Steven's post had drawn enough members in to redo the vote, and we'd arrived a whole hour earlier. To convince the people, I and Aster would head one direction and go door to door, while Steven and Matt would do the same. Armed with magic, flyers, our Wyson words, and a psychic, we were ready for anything, especially an evil HOA bent on increasing the value of their homes. Hope, nostalgia, and the dying power of the Fae were on our side. Maybe not so much that last part. Me and Aster made quick work of the first row of houses, elderly couples who invited us in for tea. Most supported us, but were far too unconcerned to vote. I spun terrifying stories of a generation unable to see the green, and Aster reached within to evoke waves of nostalgia. We had mixed results. Don't you wish your kids could see that park too, and play? I insisted. I don't have kids, an old, tie-wearing man informed. Okay, but what about other people's kids? I repeated. Aster reached in to evoke nostalgia. I hate children, the man insisted. 6 times out of 10 we were successful. And to me, that was a good sign, especially as the hour drew to a close. The house of the rosary pressing man was last on our journey, and as we stepped on his porch we wondered if our mission would ring true. Hi, I began, as the man opened the door. I'm wondering if you'd like to change your thoughts on the park. No, he silenced. Construction is going to make this place rich. Sir, Aster spoke, reaching in as she did. By the time housing prices soar, you'll likely be dead. But my children can reap the benefits, he insisted, wagging a finger at our faces. Aster grimaced as she found a particularly distasteful memory. Something glimmered in her eyes. Don't talk to your children often. They don't believe in the same causes you do. What makes you think they'll appreciate this? Because I said so. That's why he paused, stunned. How the hell do you know? Aster cut him off. Doing this for your children won't make them hate you anymore, but perhaps talking to them and saving the park will help your kids more. He stopped and slammed the door behind him. Well, that went well, I decided. My watch rang. It's time. The team regrouped, and together with a new, rising army of the young, the middle, and old behind us, we were ready to vote. We had spread the word only by participating within the small-scale world could one truly make a difference. Life, I assumed, was like that. 1,000 small things that added up into something truly real. Each small number, each person added into the culmination of the vote we would have today. In the trees and shadows, brilliant foxes and lights watched us closely. Their survival bordered on our words, and I didn't want to see any other person, greedy HOA member or not, get killed by the whimsical spirits of nature. As Karen nor Barbara are here, Rosary Man began. I am in charge. Today we're gathered in the name of Lorder, construction to determine the fate of Oldman Park. He paused and scanned the audience. I know we're divided over this topic. Some of us want the new spa and gym. Some of us want to preserve the park. So let us discuss. Steven spoke next. I've lived here all my life, and this park has brought me countless memories. Days skipping across with butterflies, drawing things in the dirt, basking against the sun. Surely you would not deprive your children. He eyed Rosary Man. We'd informed him of Aster's discovery of these fine memories. The crowd rumbled in both agreement and disagreement. Aster reached beyond the veil, tugging at the very heart of the community. Then let us vote, struck the man with the rosary. And personally I have decided to keep the park. And so we voted, to vote for both the soul of the community and for the survival of a species, for Steven's memories, For my conscience, a step forward in a brighter path. The vote concludes. Stephen shouted, taking all the ballots. He and Rosary Man counted 64 to 38 in favor of preservation. A wide, joyous smile crept up on his face. We had succeeded. Our will had preserved. I found myself with Stephen hours later, walking the trail of the park, slowly making our way to the center. Aster and Matt had returned. There were still more boxes to catalog at the house. Thank you, Stephen said as we approached the stone, bristled with more life than ever. Spirit creatures danced around us, only seen to our eyes. And the moon. Your father was deep in the world of the artifact, but you've shown me that there's a new side to the trade, a less criminal, good side. Thank you, Stephen, I echoed. You've served both my father and me. Thank you for being with us. He laughed heartily and looked within my eyes with an old, wizened stare. My debts to your family are long from being fully paid, but I'm happy to serve for many years to come. And we watched the small folk upon their city, blissfully ignorant of the outside world, safe in their last citadel of safety. Even as their species came to an end, did they find the smallest moments to live, to dance, to truly enjoy, and yet as small and insignificant as they were, their survival touched my heart, and it was then when I truly realized how significant even the smallest things could be. And though I was scared of the beasts the fairies had summoned, the thought of victory was good enough to assuade me.